Good evening. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We're just at 9 o'clock now, Eastern time. So I think we're just going to give it a couple of minutes to allow time for a few more people to join before we get started, so we don't have interruptions once Jan gets going. So if you don't mind sitting tight for just a few minutes, we'll get started shortly. Okay, well, we're at about 3 minutes past 9 now, so I think we'll get started. We will continue to admit people as they join. So hopefully that won't cause too much disruption, but I don't want to keep you waiting. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Lisa McCoy, and I'm the Executive Director for Tourette Canada. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, for taking the time out during your busy evening. I know that you'll find this presentation inspiring and enjoyable. We're very fortunate to have Jan Stewart with us again this evening. This is the second time that Jan has delivered this presentation for our Tourette audience. She very kindly agreed to deliver the presentation on the 15th of May, which was the first day of Tourette Syndrome Awareness Month. And then kindly offered to come back this evening on June the 7th, which is International Tourette Awareness Day. So we thought it was quite fitting. And this time slot is a little bit later in the evening. We hope to be able to capture some of our friends on the West Coast. For those of you who don't know Jan, she is a very well-regarded mental health advocate, and she's recently launched a book called Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey in Raising Children with Mental Illness, in which she candidly describes the shock she and her husband experienced when they started to see some troubling behaviors in both of their children. We hope that you'll enjoy the presentation and be able to relate to some of Jan's experiences. I'm going to encourage you, if you have questions, to please use the Q&A function, which you'll see at the top of your presentation window. It's just a little icon that says Q&A. Just type in your questions, and Jan will gladly answer those questions at the end of the presentation. And if for any reason we don't have time to get to all your questions, we will record them, and Jan will get back to you via email to ensure your questions get answered. So with that, now all the housekeeping complete, it's my great pleasure to turn the presentation over to Jan Stewart. Please enjoy.
Hi, everyone. I am absolutely delighted to be with you tonight for International Tourette Syndrome Awareness Day. I guess we should call it evening. Now, as Lisa knows, I'm not technologically very smart, but I'm going to now come and get the PowerPoint ready so that you can all see it. And if there's any problem, please let me know. It should be coming up in a minute. And then I'm going to go into private view and then into layout, which is standout. And there we go. Does this all look all right? I hope so.
Looks great, Jan.
Okay, well then I will get started. So welcome, everyone. Like many of you tonight, my husband David and I grew up in warm, loving families. Neither of us had known real adversity in our lives before we got married. Life was rosy. We had great careers. We just assumed that life would continue on. And then we had children. Finding out that we didn't have one, but two children with Tourette syndrome and multiple associated conditions really came, as Lisa said, as quite a shock to us and turned our lives upside down. Words like Tourette, autism, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, executive function, learning disabilities, none of these had ever been in my vocabulary before. That said, I am here tonight as an ambassador of hope and perseverance. I'm here to tell you our family story unsugar-coated, but also to spread the message to each of you to persevere. There's help, there's lots of hope, and everyone can do it. You're not alone. I also want to start with a little disclaimer. There is no question that I am white, heterosexual, and privileged. And I'm the first one to tell you that that certainly has made our family's journey easier in terms of being able to afford the sometimes very steep costs that come with raising neurodivergent children. But what I want to stress with you is that I'm going to share key insights and life lessons throughout the presentation, and these are universal. It doesn't matter if you're married or single, struggling financially or comfortable. These insights cross all boundaries: race, religions, cultures, ethnicities, gender identity, sexual orientation, the list goes on. What it takes is grit, determination, that wonderful word perseverance that I use a lot, and a will to succeed, and all of you can do that. So as I reflect on our journey, and this is a journey that continues today, there's one overarching insight that crosses all facets of a child's life. And this is to insist on integrated partnership approach with every professional involved in your child's care. I'm going to be going through this in some detail throughout the evening, but it applies to healthcare, to schools, to employers. To this day, I make sure that the children's psychiatrists and psychologists regularly communicate with one another so that they can adjust their medication and therapeutic approaches. Schools. We wouldn't have kept the kids in schools that didn't work in partnership with us. Uh, whether it was notes coming home every evening or monthly group meetings, these things were very important and treating us as partners. And again, I'll be going through this more. And in employment as well. We really need inclusive and understanding employers. What's important is to have everyone on the same page, listening to each other, sharing perspectives. It's so much more powerful that way. And to me, there's no question that partnership and teamwork mean everything. Well, I have two amazing children. Here you see them, Andrew and Ainsley. They're grown now, but from almost the time they were born, my husband and I felt in our gut that something wasn't right. Andrew is a baby. His hands and feet move constantly in circular motion. Unlike other babies, he didn't play in his crib, gurgle, or talk to himself. He demanded to be picked up right away. And he had no self-control when it came to feeding. We actually did an experiment when he was about 6 months old and decided to see how many bottles of milk he would consume. But after he downed 5 straight bottles without getting sick and would have kept going if we had let him, we were scared and stopped him. The next day, we decided to control his intake and gave him just 1 bottle. And to my surprise, he was just as happy. So we saw that even then, he had difficulty with self-regulation as a 6-month-old. Of course, in hindsight, we can look back and see that these are many neurodevelopmental markers. But we were first-time parents. We didn't know any better. And every time I raised a concern with the doctor, he turned to me and said, "Jan, calm down. You're being an overly vigilant, triple type A mother, and your kids are going to be just fine." But I should have trusted my gut. And this is a key insight, as well as the partnerships for you. Parents know their children better than anyone else. If you think something is seriously wrong, it generally is. Of course, you have to listen to your doctor, and I am sympathetic with doctors who see some parents who needlessly and excessively worry. But if what they say doesn't resonate with you, get a second opinion or a third opinion. Whatever you need, you deserve it. Over the next several years, we had growing concerns about both children. They were vocal and motor physical tics. There was impulsivity, distractibility, anxiety, learning disabilities. Neither child could hold a pencil or a crayon correctly. Andrew particularly had a lot of trouble with change and transitions between activities. And Ainsley became very disruptive once she started school, out of control behavior, along with paralyzing anxiety and the inability to read her friends' social cues. In fact, it was very sad. She slowly lost all her friends. And yet, our doctor kept repeating the same mantra. Your kids have learned to read and write. They're social. They speak. Don't worry. There's nothing wrong. It's just a bit of stress. I should have trusted my gut, right? So as that went on, we were oddly fortunate, and I'm going to tell you why we were oddly fortunate in a few minutes and come back to those 2 words. Shortly after Andrew turned 9, he erupted suddenly, for no apparent reason that any of us, including Andrew, could see, into 2-hour screaming meltdowns almost every day. They were frightening. He would rant and rave, punch holes in walls, kick, lash out in anything and everything. And this was a gentle, loving boy who followed every rule. And he had suddenly morphed into this terrifying monster. And he was miserable because he didn't understand it. And within a month, he started also engaging in nonstop compulsive rituals. He touched walls repeatedly for hours, couldn't put on socks for 20 or 30 minutes because they didn't feel right. He had to count to 14 to go through doors. And then the rituals escalated as he had these terrifying obsessive thoughts, irrational thoughts that something would happen to us. As his parents, we would die, his sister would be kidnapped. One of his worst thoughts about himself was that he would fall through a drain pipe. Sounds odd, but it terrified him. He knew it made no sense, but he couldn't stop the thoughts. And they drove those compulsive rituals. And it was terrifying as the OCD increased as well, became much more bizarre. He rubbed his head against car tires and poles. He got down on the filthy floor and licked it repeatedly. And he brought home glass shards and hoarded them under his bed. Now, I said I would come back to why we were oddly fortunate. And the reason is that his behavior and symptomology were so clear, were so severe, that he was finally diagnosed. And diagnosed with Tourette syndrome as his umbrella diagnosis, along with autism. At the time, he was actually diagnosed with pervasive developmental delay, which has since been folded in under DSM-5 under autism. So Tourette, autism, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, and learning disabilities. And his sister, who, as I said, hit school and was totally out of control, rude, jumping on desks, sent to the principal's office constantly. At first, we wondered, is she copying her older brother, whom she idolized? There's no question that they both had a lot of tics. They were both impulsive and distracted. But her behavior was so different. And again, clear that she was diagnosed also with Tourette syndrome, ADHD, and learning disabilities, along with severe mood and anxiety disorders. As I write in my book, Hold On Tight, it's been a challenging journey to find the right healthcare providers, psychiatrists, psychologists, and schools. So what's the first thing that I did? And here's another key insight and life lesson I share with you. I embraced the power of research. Now, we all know that research is important in helping us find resources. But as a parent, it importantly helps you become a more effective advocate. I read everything that I could. There was a book called Teaching the Tiger by Cheryl Pruitt, a US educator, a classic book on ADHD by Edward Hallowell called Driven to Distraction. We watch videos on Tourette and autism, and the list goes on. At the same time, David and I started looking for parent support groups in Toronto. And the first support group that we found was downtown Toronto for parents of kids with ADHD. On the one hand, it was wonderful for the first time to find parents who were experiencing a lot of the hyperactivity, impulsivity, and distractibility that we were. But no other parent had children like ours who were ticking, again, both vocally and motor tics, or were having these meltdowns. So we were puzzled and stymied, and back to research, both of us went. And David, just a few months later, happened to be researching Tourette syndrome and saw the words emotional overload, rage, meltdown associated with Tourette. And I can't tell you how quickly we ran to our nearest Tourette Canada support group, and we found our home. A real community of parents who understood what we were going through, who were empathetic, caring, gave us guidance and advice, and we returned it. And it really has formed our community to this day. It's so reaffirming. Now, of course, with research, the law of diminishing returns can kick in, and you have to know when to take a breather and stop, when you've done enough for the time being. Of course, you never completely stop because there are always new findings, new therapies, new medications, and you want to stay current. I know you all know with the internet to be wary, but it is a crucial source of research. Just make sure you verify information with professionals, with experts. Even to this day, I was just on social media the other day and in the internet, and I saw under Tourette, well, the kids could really stop ticking if they wanted to. It's really an attention grabber. We know that's not true. Many parents believe that ADHD is caused by poor parenting or autism by vaccines. There's just absolutely no evidence to any of that, and that's what you want to stay with. Now, once the kids were diagnosed, we entered the world of medications and therapy. To me, these are powerful partners that help one another. There's no question that if the tics are mild, are not interfering with life or causing distress, a child may not need either therapy or medications, or it may be that only therapy or only medications are needed and will do the trick. But for many children, like Andrew and Ainsley, they've needed both from the beginning, and they will throughout their lives, which is fine. They've also importantly needed the medications to start working and kick in first to change the brain chemistry enough to allow therapy to be effective. And of course, with co-occurring conditions, or what's often called comorbidities, many of these neurodevelopmental disorders overlap and look alike, and it can be confusing. But it can also, from a medication and therapy point of view, complicate matters, as one medication can be effective with one set of behaviors, but not with another. Each has their own symptoms and triggers. Now, with medications, I know parents are understandably wary oftentimes about taking a pharmacological approach to treatment. And there's no question you have to monitor the side effects and weigh the delicate interactions between the medications. I talked a few minutes ago about Andrew's frightening meltdowns almost every day. I mean, up to 2 hours a day, I was just exhausted. But after 9 months of this, I found a new developmental pediatrician, and he prescribed a powerful antipsychotic. And I kid you not, within 2 days, Andrew's meltdowns had stopped. No more. It was an unbelievable relief. Of course, I joke that I wish I had found this doctor earlier, a lot earlier. But with this medication came some concerning side effects. Andrew started gaining 3 pounds a week, and this continued every week for 6 weeks. In his case, it thankfully stopped then. But we know many children who have been on this medication who've gained 60 and 70 pounds, and it's scary. But for Andrew, this medication was and continues to be a lifesaver. Similarly, Ainsley has tried a number of medications, some of which have been very effective, some of which not, and some of which have caused nausea, stomach aches, dizziness, loss of appetite, too much appetite, same with sleep. So there's lots of trial and error and mistakes you'll make along the way. But for our family, at least, the benefits have far outweighed the risks with medications. Remember, too, that every government can help. In Ontario, where I live, for example, we have the Trillium Drug Program. So there are a number of options that you can turn to. Now, with therapy, and here you see Ainsley at Sick Kids Hospital in downtown Toronto, working with her psychologist, and I believe this was on her anxiety at the time. You want to find specialists who are qualified and trained in the issues your children face. So I hope you all know in Tourette, it's CBIT, Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention with Tics, is highly effective for many children. It's a habit reversal therapy where the children learn to become aware of tics, the urge to tic, the triggers that cause or increase tics. They learn competing behaviors when they feel that urge, and some relaxation techniques as well. Now, what I want you all to remember, that therapy is a family affair. It's not just for the child. We parents can get trained based on CBIT, and I certainly have been, as was David. I had to learn to recognize and deal with my own emotions. There was no question I had frustration at times. I was annoyed. I had a parent call me just last week who admitted that she's embarrassed when she's in public with her child when he ticks, which is a shame, but it's reality. I had to learn to identify situations that would make the children's tics worse and develop plans. Similarly, I learned strategies to help with those meltdowns and disruptive behaviors, that emotional overload that often accompanies Tourette. We all know to use, of course, positive reinforcement and praise. I think it's particularly important when the child is using competing response training. It's wonderful to see. And I had to learn not to react to the tics or treat Andrew or Ainsley differently because of them. We really want to focus on their strengths, and there's so many strengths. Structure and routine, so important. Keeping the children busy. And of course, learning relaxation techniques often helps. Has not helped my kids as much, to be frank, but many of the other things have. Now that's Tourette. For ADHD and anxiety, the kids also learned and still do cognitive behavioral therapy. And Andrew benefited significantly with his OCD, with exposure and response prevention. Where in a nutshell, if you don't know it, he learned you can't control those disruptive, distressing thoughts. But what you can learn is not to respond to them. You let the thoughts effectively wash over you and not engage in rituals. I'm simplifying, but you get the feeling that way. I think what we have to remember is that the environment is unique to every child, and that differences are not necessarily deficits. Throughout this period, one of the important life lessons and key insights that David and I learned was to talk openly with the children. This sounds like a cliche, but it's much more than that. Neurodivergent children are naturally frightened when they don't know what's going on in their lives fully. Why are they causing pain and havoc at home and at school? There can be shame and anguish. And even if they don't explicitly ask for it, they want help. This includes teenagers, by the way. So give it to them. Sit down with them. Listen carefully without judgment, which is not my strength, by the way. Let them know they're valued and understood. This was difficult at first for David and me. We had to overcome our own hesitations. When Andrew was going through those frightening meltdowns and those bizarre rituals, he told us one day that he felt he was going crazy and wanted to die. Now, can you imagine as a parent, your 9-year-old tells you he wants to die? And at the same time, Ainsley, who had been sent, as I said, to the principal's office almost every day, came home one afternoon and wrote me a note, left it on my bed. And when I opened it, my heart broke. She said, "Mom, I know I'm a bad child, but I can't help my out of control behavior." And so initially I froze, but David and I knew it was important to address these. So we quickly picked ourselves up, sat down with the kids. We made sure that they understood they were not bad children, that what was happening was not their faults. We separated them from their issues so that their identities weren't just tied to Tourette syndrome and the co-occurring conditions. And importantly, we didn't hide or avoid information. This is so important. I know a number of parents who call medications special vitamins. And I understand they're trying to get the kids to take the meds. They don't want the children to feel different or singled out, but I don't think that's helpful. What you want to do is involve your child and educate them so that as they grow older, they increasingly become empowered and they can then become active in their own treatment and advocacy. Both my kids do this, and it's just wonderful to see. And as part of talking openly with your children, don't forget siblings. It's so easy to unintentionally relegate a sibling who has fewer issues or no issues, and Ainsley has fewer than Andrew, to relegate them to the background while you're consumed with a child in crisis. I know I've done it. To this day, my stomach turns at what happened one evening. I came home from work, cold February snowy evening. And as I rounded the corner and opened the gate to our backyard, I saw Ainsley shivering in the snow, barefoot in just her nightgown. She was so frightened of Andrew's meltdown that had started. And it really, again, shook me up. And David and I recognized that we had to spend whatever precious little time we had. And as any parent of neurodivergent children know, there's precious little time. So we did several things. The first thing is we took turns spending one-on-one time with her in activities that she enjoyed. Must be activities that the child enjoyed. She was a real tomboy at the time, so it was playing hockey and soccer. But she also liked certain board games like Candyland and loved baking together. Riverdale Farm in downtown Toronto had a wonderful urban farm program for siblings in trauma, and it gave her such respite from the challenges at home. It interestingly also started her on a lifelong love of animals. Sibling support groups are fantastic. And perhaps most importantly, we again sat down with her and in age-appropriate language explained in detail what was going on with Andrew so that we demystified it and it became far less frightening. Now, at the same time, another insight and life lesson. We learn to reset the expectations for our lives. Tourette and associated conditions can throw every family member's life into disarray. There can be fear, anger, and resentment. And I can tell you, I've been there many times. I've wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. I've wanted to run away. I've looked at myself in the mirror multiple times and said, why me? Why us? But the key to being able to move forward is to not only accept, but embrace the fact that your life is not going to be as planned for or hoped for in many ways. Once you do that, you can see the path forward. David and I started our lives as young parents the same, I'm sure, as all of you, with hopes and dreams of happy, successful children. Yet our reality was so different. Actually, the tics never, in both children, never really bothered us, maybe with the exception of Andrew throwing his neck back, where to this day, I worry that he's going to physically hurt his neck, and a few other tics. But on the whole, the tics were what they were. But we were frightened, obviously, by his meltdowns and rituals. We were drained by Ainsley's out-of-control behavior and anxiety. We had to stop having a social life for a number of years because we never knew what was going to happen at home. And importantly, we had to learn to recalibrate the support we could expect to receive from certain family members and friends. This comes from a lack of education and awareness that can lead to fear, misunderstandings, and that terrible word stigma that abounds. Both David's and my families were extremely understanding. There's no question about it, but even my mother, who was my closest confidant in the world, educated, and I thought she understood everything. First, she turned to me when Andrew started taking that life-saving medication that stopped his meltdowns in their tracks, but started him gaining all that weight. And she said to me, well, you don't want a fat child. I was stunned. And with Ainsley, she said, Jan, you just need to be a stricter parent, and Ainsley's unruly behavior would disappear. I don't think so, Mom. Now, to her credit, a number of months later, she recognized what she had done and was horrified as she became more educated. But it still left an imprint on my heart and still does to this day. I know many parents who say their families don't want to get involved. They're too busy. are scared. I even had someone call me a few weeks ago who was quite upset. Her own parents had called her and said, "Dear, do you want us to start looking into institutions for Adam?" Really? Pretty upsetting. So with family members who are not truly supportive, who don't understand, you have to learn to navigate and limit your engagement, particularly when they're critical, judgmental, or when they think they have all the answers. And with friends, some will distance themselves for the same reasons. It's upsetting. I've had it happen. And both kids have had it happen too. But of course, with friends, you can do what you can't do with family so easily, shed them. If they're not truly there for you, as difficult as it is, get rid of them. There's a great silver lining here. And that's other parents of neurodivergent children. As I said, formed a great community of understanding and acceptance. I tell a story, and I may have told this in the last webinar. A number of years ago, Andrew and I were walking our dog in some trails near our house in Toronto. And Andrew was vocally ticking. He was hooting, and it sounded like, whoo, whoo, whoo. A passerby came running up to him and said, "Are you okay?" And I remember thinking, I don't know how he's going to react to this one. But without missing a beat, he looked her straight in the eye and said, "Oh, I'm just bird calling." I don't know how he found that brilliant answer, but it was great to see. And again, it's those parents of kids similar to ours who really gave us hope and propelled me forward to persevere. Now, as the children transitioned into adults, we faced a whole new set of challenges. For you parents of younger children, you may not yet know what your children's capabilities and needs are going to be, but it can mean that you may have to take care of your kids longer than you anticipated and expected or hoped. That's certainly true in our case, and it can be very expensive. We're talking about medications not covered by insurance, private therapy, and for some of you, some type of supportive housing. Let's first talk about employment. And here you see Andrew proudly wearing his employer's shirt, Rogers Communications. We know that finding meaningful employment for neurodivergent individuals and keeping that employment can be very difficult. The statistics show that unemployment is significantly higher than the general population, and underemployment on top of that, along with needless discrimination, of course, and stigma. Remember, every government has resources to help in this regard. For example, we have in Ontario, the Ontario Disability Support Program, which has both income supports and employment supports. We've certainly used those, and there are other job assistance programs as well. When I look at Andrew, he ticks a lot. Again, vocally and physically, motor. He has major speech impediment, which makes him difficult to understand. And he doesn't always understand social cues and lines of authority. He takes more of his supervisor's time, and he needs more time off for healthcare and similar appointments. As I write in Hold On Tight, there's been such a contrast between his previous employers and Rogers Communications today. His first major employer was a retailer, and Andrew was a cashier. And he did really well until they changed management several years later. And then they needlessly discriminated against him. They pulled him from his cashier position without giving him any reason why, and stuck him in the back, stocking shelves. I waited a few weeks, but it became pretty quickly apparent that they didn't want someone ticking up front with customers. I took care of it right away, but of course, trust had been broken. His second employer, another major organization in Toronto, really wanted to do the right thing. But they were too bureaucratic to work in partnership. There's that key word again we talked about at the beginning, with Andrew and with us. And so they treated him like a child. They gave him 1 hour of pretty boring work every morning And by the way, remember that boring work is not good for a brain with ADHD. And then told him as a reward, Andrew, you can go watch TV. Andrew didn't feel very good about that. But Rogers has translated that well-meaning into action. And a good part of Andrew's success there over the past 4.5 years is because of the partnership they have with Andrew and with us. Now, this means that neurodivergent individuals and employees have to be able to advocate for themselves. But if you can't advocate or take the lead, tell the employer what you need to succeed, and then have the employer customize accommodations. Don't be afraid to bring an advocate, an ally. It can be a family member, a friend, a professional. Andrew can advocate to a large extent, but he often turns to me and we'll partner together. And ever since Andrew joined, it's been wonderful to see what Rogers has done. They agreed to an in-service education session with us at the start so that we could explain Tourette syndrome and the co-occurring conditions to them, explain Andrew's strengths, importantly, and his major issues in the workplace, which in his case is impulsivity and anxiety. They then customized accommodations for him by listening to our recommendations and following our advice. I said earlier he has difficulty with change and transitions, so they've set his work hours the same every day, while every other team member works on shift. And importantly, from the start, they brought in a job coach who to this day meets with both Rogers and Andrew pretty much on a monthly basis. And what they get in return is a loyal, valued, hardworking employee who wants to stay at Rogers till he's 70 and be the best employee there, not the best disabled employee. Now, housing is another area where there's a full continuum of needs. Ainsley certainly doesn't need supportive housing, but we knew that Andrew needed something. We weren't sure what. So when he became 21, 22, we started looking. We were in no hurry, but sadly the wait list for any type of supportive housing, not only in Toronto, but across North America, is years long. It's terrible. So I got on those wait lists and back to research we went. And about 9 months later, I found a lovely private small group home just 10 or 15 minutes away from us, and Andrew moved in there enthusiastically. Now, very expensive, but there are lots of options for families. There are other families that'll take in neurodivergent individuals. You might consider renting a unit for your child and having a pull-out couch, or if needed, a separate room for a support worker. There are organizations like Lights and RENA and other organizations that you can look into. So you have to be creative and persevere, but it is possible if needed. After 10 great years there, management, and they had the right to do this, wanted to become more of a transitory focus, and Andrew doesn't need that. What he needs is protection and security. But we were pretty sure he could handle supportive independent living. And that's what we've done since then. He lives just 5 minutes away from us, and David and I take turns going down every morning to oversee him getting ready for work. We prepare his meals, and off he goes for the day. And Ainsley is just another 5 minutes away, which gives both kids a lot of comfort, and gives me comfort too, that we're all near each other. So you see that life has been tough at times for us, but what it has done is propelled all of us to start advocating. We're all involved with Tourette Canada. We were on the trek just a week ago Sunday, and it was wonderful to see. David co-leads the Tourette Toronto support group. Both kids do as well. And I've been on about 7 different boards and advisory councils in both Canada and the United States. I was vice chair at CAMH. I was involved with OCD. And I currently, as Lisa said, chair Carrie's Place Autism Services, the largest autism services provider in Canada. I also write a monthly column for Today's Parent right now on autism. And all this advocacy has led to so many struggling parents reaching out through the years for help. I so remember being in these shoes, frightened, frozen, not knowing where to turn or how. And that's why I wrote my book, Hold On Tight. As I said, I want readers to understand the reality of raising neurodivergent children. But equally, I want to celebrate successes. And I share some of the key insights that we've been talking about tonight to ease the journey. Let me just go through a few more with you quickly. The first is make a financial plan. Now, again, for you parents of younger kids, you may not yet know what your child's needs are going to be, but be conservative. As the American author Alan Laken says, failing to plan is planning to fail. If you're not adept, find a financial planner, ideally a fee-based planner whose objective doesn't sell product. They don't cost a lot, and they can make a huge difference between a more secure and a more uncertain future. Next, be kind to your partner. Here's my partner, David. Now, this is true for all partnerships, but for we parents of neurodivergent children, as you know, the stresses and strains can really be debilitating. I've heard many partners blame one another, accuse, undermine each other, and there can be differences about everything from diagnoses to discipline to therapy and meds. Medications in particular can cause a lot of disagreements. Some of you may be experiencing that now. Remember, your children have inbuilt antenna, and they know when their parents aren't on the same page. And again, David and I have not been immune. Our demands have been so overwhelming that we've had so little time for each other. But we trust each other and lean on each other. And we even joke with one another about the disorders. David had a relative come visit a few years ago, and all throughout dinner, he was shoulder shrugging and eye ticking. And so I pointed at David and I said, aha, Tourette syndrome. And he points right back at me with my perfectionism and says, aha, back, OCD. So give each other the benefit of the doubt and try to act harmoniously as a unit in your children's best interest. And finally, take care of yourself. This goes way beyond the all-important exercising, sleeping, eating healthfully. You obviously want to do those. But reach out for the support that you yourself need, whether it's to healthcare professionals, or as I said, I love support groups, and particularly other parents of neurodivergent children who really strengthen my emotional fortitude. Don't forget humor. It's such an important part of our coping toolkit. I call Andrew Mr. Mayor. Everywhere we go, people know him because he's so outgoing. He has a lack of filter, and so he reaches out to anyone and everyone. And just the other day, we were crossing the street, and he said, oh, hi, Mr. Mayor. He just knows everyone. And so we do try to have fun with our lives. Carve out part of your life as your own, away from your partner and children. You can get burned out otherwise. So whether it's your career, which lets you focus away from your challenges at home, or your hobbies. I love the treadmill at the gym, which lets me think through my issues and regain perspective. I play bridge at a very high level, duplicate bridge, and I have to focus 200% on bridge. Take breaks, whether it's a 10-minute walk by yourself, or even a warm, soothing bubble bath. Those I could even handle when the kids were in terrible shape in a crisis. And they're important in giving you some breathing room and helping you refuel and regain some of your own identity. And lastly, be kind to yourself. One of the hardest things for me to this day is to forgive myself for my mistakes. When I think back to that day, finding Ainsley shivering in the snow barefoot during Andrew's meltdown, I should have protected her better. But I also know how important it is to compliment myself. Pat yourselves on the back. You are your children's champions. Remind yourself of your strength, your fortitude, and your perseverance. It's really wonderful to see. So here you see the kids, Andrew and Ainsley, grown now. And I can't tell you how proud I am of them both. Andrew has this wonderful job at Rogers. In an infectious charm, he advocates for himself. And Ainsley is such a gifted child and youth counselor working with young neurodivergent children. And I'm convinced it's her own lived experiences, as well as her deep intrinsic knowledge of Andrew, that have made her such a valued resource. It's their grit, determination, and will to succeed that, as I've said before, are breathtaking. So, as I said earlier, I am here tonight, and I'm trying to get to the last slide, and it doesn't want to come. Let me see if I can get it for you. Hold on. Anyway, it's not coming, but I'm just going to talk then. I'm here as an ambassador of hope and perseverance. I have a quarterly newsletter with many insights and tips, which you can access through my website at janstewartauthor.com. I post every day on both Instagram and Facebook at Jan Stewart Author about neurodiversity. And today I posted about Tourette Syndrome Awareness Day and the webinar. And my book, Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey Raising Children with Mental Illness, is widely available, Amazon, Indigo, Caversham booksellers in downtown Toronto, Barnes & Noble. I'm thrilled it's won the Mom's Choice Award out of the US. And if you read it and it resonates with you, please let me know, and please post a review on Amazon. I joke, positive reviews only, please. On this June 7th, I raise a toast to every individual with Tourette syndrome. And I hope that I have given you the inspiration and empowerment tonight to persevere through the most difficult of times, have hope, and hold on tight. Thank you. I'm going to unshare the screen and open it for questions. Did I unshare the screen? I'm not sure if I've done that correctly. Oh, stop sharing. There it is. It says stop sharing and stop. There we go. It should be coming in a minute.
And you're back, Jan. There you
Okay.
are. Good job.
Technologically, I amaze myself.
You did a great job. Well, thank you so much, Jan. As always, even though this is my second time through, I can assure you I learn something new each time, and you certainly do inspire. So I'm confident I speak for the others on the line tonight in saying thank you and appreciate your offer to take questions. I don't see any questions immediately popping up in the Q&A, but certainly if any of our guests would like to ask them, please feel free to type your question in the Q&A. But in the meantime, Jan, and we talked a little bit about this during our May 15th presentation, you touched on the importance of advocacy. And, we spoke about the fact that there really are very limited services, supports, even healthcare professionals out there with specialties in Tourette syndrome. Very difficult even to get a diagnosis. And depending on where you live in the country, there may be no one. There may be no one with that specialty, whether it be a psychiatrist or neurologist or even a social worker who has had experience working with children with Tourette syndrome. And I know here at Tourette Canada, as we try to keep our service directory up to date, it's very challenging. And we can see that there are many parts of the country where those services are extremely limited. And often there are long wait lists, even where there are services. So certainly being able to advocate for people with Tourette syndrome is a job that Tourette Canada is working hard to do more of with the help of our volunteers. But as parents, you touched on the fact that there are things that they can do as individuals on a smaller scale to really get the ball rolling to ensure their children are in the best possible place. What kind of advice would you give just in terms of, helping parents understand how to get started with that advocacy piece?
Yes, it's very, very important. So the first thing you have to do is get educated. Do all that reading you can, that research that I talked about earlier. That's absolutely critical. Now, for those of you in rural areas or underserved areas, it's difficult. I'm the first to tell you that, but don't give up. First of all, get on those wait lists in Toronto. I'm going to tell you a brief story that after a year at Sick Kids, because of the multiplicity of both Andrews and Ainsley's conditions, Sick Kids said, in Canada, we just don't see, now this is many, many years ago, it's much better now, we just don't see that many children with 5, 6 neurodevelopmental conditions. So if you can go to the States, they see 10 times as many more kids who are similar. And I embraced that research again and called 10 or 20 hospitals and psychiatrists east of the Mississippi because I wanted to be near Toronto until I kept hearing the same name. So that's the type of advocacy you want to do. If someone doesn't call you back, often I'll hear, oh, ODSP, they don't call me back, or the government, or I have this question. Call again, go down to the offices. The key is to be assertive, but not aggressive. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. Often they're totally overloaded with case loads and what they have to do. So put yourself in their shoes, but be that squeaky wheel. Keep going.
Thank you, Jan. And I think we may be having a bit of an issue with our Q&A, but we do have a couple of comments in the chat. So thank you, folks, for being so resourceful. So maybe I'll just take a look. We have one of our participants who has a son who's 8 years old, um, and he's displaying tics.
Mhm.
And as the parent does have Tourette syndrome and is wondering how they can discuss this with their son to make him aware of the situation in a way I suppose that would be appropriate for his age at 8 years old.
Now, of course, I don't know, and Lisa, you don't know the full story, and we're not professionals, healthcare professionals. So let me start with saying it's likely that your son may have Tourette because you do. There would be a greater genetic component that way. But let's remember that tics do not necessarily mean a child has Tourette syndrome. That's number one. And if the tics aren't bothersome or interfering or causing distress, they're just there. But I always believe in being as open and transparent as possible. And isn't it great when a child can say, look at me, I have Tourette syndrome, or whatever way you want to say it, you have to do it in age appropriate language. And the tics just don't bother me. There are other things that might, and we're going to partner together and we're going to find the solutions. And I think you just talk very openly that way. If the child has, impulsivity, has the emotional meltdowns, has the other things that are going on, you address them and say, again, this is not you. These are your conditions. It's not your fault. And introduce them if you're in a locale where there are other children that you can find or other parents nearby. That's so powerful when they start to feel part of a community. Would you agree with that, Lisa?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think we should, say, and thank you for mentioning that. I mean, while we both work in the Tourette space, we are not healthcare professionals. We are not physicians or psychiatrists or psychologists or social workers. So, Jan is giving you um, advice based on her life experiences, and hopefully that's of help to you. But yeah, and I mean, certainly continue to seek out that healthcare professional if you feel that this is something that may be developing into something other than minor tics, and or if you're even concerned about the minor tics, even start with a family doctor. They may not have all the answers, but they may be able to refer you somewhere else. But you've got to have a starting point. So that I think that's excellent. And then Jan, we have an attendee who's relatively new to Canada and is wanting to ensure that their son's, sort of health monitoring can continue, and is just asking where to start. And if you don't mind, I would just say the
Please.
same thing. I would say probably your first step is looking for a family doctor if you don't yet have one. And I know sometimes in some places it's not even that easy to find a family doctor, but it's probably a good first step, because, again, well, that physician may not have all the answers, may not have all the expertise. They may be able to have enough to provide you with a good next first step. And again, it is one step at a time. But that would be my suggestion. I don't know if Jan, if you have anything else to add on that.
I have two things to add to that. One is Tourette Canada. Don't be afraid to contact Tourette Canada. They're a wealth of information. That's number one, and in development, but still, this is your association and your organization, and extremely helpful. But also, if you're in a community where there are not, or you don't know other parents or other kids with similar concerns and conditions, just go online. I talked about the internet, and we do want to be wary, but you'll find articles by parents like me. All across Canada, you'll find all kinds of resources. Reach out to those folks and start networking. Networking is so important, and that's how you build one step at a time.
Okay. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the questions we have. But I will say to the folks who've attended tonight, first of all, thank you so much for being with us. I hope and I'm sure that you did find this very insightful. Do feel free to reach out to Tourette Canada through our website, or email me directly if you like, if you have questions. And if I'm not able to answer, or if there are questions that Jan may have some insights for, I can forward them to her. You can reach me at executivedirector@tourette.ca. And with that, I'll just say thank you so much, Jan, again, for being with us tonight, for sharing your story so openly, and being so generous with your time for the second time on this presentation. We really value you and your story, and appreciate you sharing it with our audience tonight.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I love Tourette Canada and the work that the organization is doing. And if I can be of any help to anyone, please reach out.
Thank you so much. And so with that, I'll say good night to everyone, and thank you again for attending. Bye for
Night.
now.